Welcome back to Another World Audiobooks. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's so good to have you here. As always, I really appreciate every single listener who listens to the podcast. We've been doing this for a while, and it's awesome just to see the community growing, and I hope you guys are enjoying the books as much as I enjoy narrating them. Before we get into this, I usually do this at the end just in case people don't care and they just want to hear the story. But there's a word there at the start that I was like, wait, what? And so it's very much close at the start of the chapter here, and it's the occiput. It's just the back part of the head or skull. So if I've learned anything about Simon Templar so far in this short intro that we've done in the book, it's that he likes to throw out words that I have no idea what they are. So it's your occipital bone, so your occiput is the back part of your head or skull. So hopefully that clarifies things for you here in the beginnings of the chapter, and I'll have some more clarifications at the end of the chapter too, because he's always throwing in these words. I'm like, wait, what is happening? So anyway, let's just jump right into it without further ado. I give you the next chapter of Meet the Tiger. Chapter 6. The Kindness of the Tiger. "Here we are again," murmured the saint. "Seeing quite a lot of each other tonight, aren't we? And how's the occiput? Not dented beyond repair, I hope?" Biddle inclined his head.
"A trifle primitive,"
he said urbanely,
"but very effective. I have views of my own, however, on the subject of physical violence, which I shall present to you in due course."
"Splendid," said Templar. He looked around for the man who had been covering him, and bowed to that gentleman with a smile. "Dear old Bloomin' Bloom, of course," remarked the saint sociably. "I knew we'd find you in the thick of the fun. Quite one of the dogs of the dorp, or village, aren't you? And just in case of accidents, would you rather be blipped on the jaw or in the solar plexus? A jolt in the tum-tum is more painful, but on the other hand, the cove who stops one just where his face changes its mind is liable to carry a scar around with him for some time. Just as you like, of course. I always try to oblige my customers in these little details."
"That will do, Mr. Templar."
Biddle's voice broke in curtly.
"I think you've talked quite enough for one evening."
"But I haven't started yet," complained the saint. "I was just going to tell one of my favorite stories. Old Bloom's heard it before, but it might be a new one to you. The one about an Italian gentleman called Fernando, who double-crossed some of the bando. They got even for this with the aid of a Chris, and that was the end of Fernando. Any applause?" The saint looked about him in his mild way, as though he literally expected an outburst of clapping. Nobody moved. Bloom still had his automatic accurately trained on the saint, and the boor's leathery face betrayed nothing. Biddle had gone ashy pale. The butler and a couple of other hard nuts who had followed the party into the library stood like graven images.
"I told you, he knows too much," said Bloom. "Better not take any chances this time."
"I'm very upset about this," said Simon earnestly. "That one usually gets a rousing reception." "Poor old Fernando. He used up so much energy cursing tigers and things that he didn't live quite long enough to tell me where the Spondulics were." "Bakeham, in England, Devonshire," gasps Fernando, with a haft of the Chris sticking out of him and the blood choking his throat. "The old house." And then he died. Just like in a storybook, and deuced awkward, with so many old and oldish houses lying about. But Fernando certainly hated tigers, and you can't blame him. Bloom raised the gun a trifle, and his knuckles whitened under the brown skin of his hand.
"It is easily settled,"
he muttered, and the saint saw death staring him in the face.
"No!"
shouted Biddle. The millionaire flung himself forward, knocking up the pistol. Biddle was trembling. He mopped his brow with a large white handkerchief, breathing heavily.
"You fool!"
he jerked.
"The girl's been here. He helped her get away. If anything happens to him, she'll talk. Do you want to put a rope round all our necks?"
"You always did argue soundly, Biddle darling," said the saint appreciatively. He seated himself on the table, swinging his legs, and the proverbial cucumber would have looked smoking hot beside him.
"It must be arranged so as to look like an accident," said Biddle. "That damned girl will have the police buzzing about our ears unless the circumstances are above suspicion."
Bloom shrugged.
"The girl can be silenced,"
he stated dispassionately.
"You leave the girl alone," snarled Biddle. "Where's the chief?"
The Saint saw Bloom's face convulse with a warning scowl.
"He will return later."
"Now that's good news," said Simon. "Am I really going to meet the celebrated tiger at last? You've no idea how much I want to see him, but he's such an elusive cove, always incog."
"You need have no fear, Mr. Templar," said Biddle, "that the tiger will show himself to you unless he is quite certain that you will never be able to use your knowledge against him. I think," added the millionaire suavely, "that you may expect to meet the tiger tonight."
The Saint realized that Biddle's panic of a few moments past had been caused by the fear of being involved in a police inquiry rather than by the horror of witnessing a cold-blooded murder. Biddle was quite calm again, but there was no trace of human pity in his faded eyes, and the level tone in which his significant afterthought was delivered would have struck terror into the soul of most men. But the Saint's nerves were like chilled steel, and his optimism was unshakable. He met Biddle's eyes steadily and smiled. "Don't gamble on it," advised the Saint. "I've lived pretty dangerously for 8 years, and nobody's ever killed me yet. Even the tiger mightn't break the record."
"I hope," said Biddle, "that the tiger will prove to be as clever as you are."
"Hope on, Sonnikins," said the Saint cheerfully. They had searched him from crown to toe when he came in from the garden, but they had left him his cigarette case, and for this he was duly thankful. The case was a large one, and carried a double bank of cigarettes. There were some peculiarities about the cigarettes on one side of the case which the Saint had not felt bound to explain to Biddle when he returned it. For several of the victories which Templar had scored against apparently impossible odds in the course of his hectic career as a gentleman adventurer had been due to his habit of invariably keeping at least one card up his sleeve. Even when he had not got aces parked in his belt, under his hat, and in the soles of his shoes. Meanwhile, it had not yet come to the showdown, and the Saint did not believe in performing his particular brand of parlor tricks simply to amuse the assembled company. He selected a cigarette from the other side of the case, which in itself was not quite an ordinary case, for one of the edges, which was guarded when the case was shut, was as sharp as a razor, and began to smoke with a sublime indifference to the awkwardness of his predicament. Biddle and Bloom were arguing in low tones at the other end of the room, and both were armed. The pugilistic butler was posted at the door, and it was unlikely that he would be caught napping a second time. The Saint could probably have beaten him in a straight fight, but it would not have been an easy job, and the audience in this case would most certainly interfere. The other two men stood by the French windows, to prevent a repetition of the Saint's earlier unceremonious exit. They were both hard and husky specimens, and the Saint, weighing up the prospects with a fighter's eye, decided that that retreat was effectually barred for the time being. There were few men that the Saint, in splendid training, would have hesitated to tackle single-handed, and few men that he would not have backed himself to tie in knots and lay out all neat and tidy inside 5 minutes into the bargain. But he had to admit that a team of 3 heavyweights and a couple of automatics totaled up to something a bit above his form. Wherefore the Saint stayed sitting on the table and placidly smoked his cigarette, for he had never believed in getting worked up before the fireworks started. He looked at his watch and found that there was a clear half-hour to go before he could expect any help from outside. He blessed his foresight in telling Patricia to go to Cannes if anything went wrong, but that was a last resource which the Saint hoped he would not have to call upon. Simon wanted nothing less than to be under any sort of obligation to the detective, and he certainly did not want to give Cannes a better hand than the deal had given him. Nevertheless, it was comforting to know that Cannes was at hand in case of a hitch, not to mention the admirable Oris, who would shortly be getting restive, even if he had not started to move already. And it was satisfying to find that a similar reflection was cramping the style of the ungodly considerably. The Saint's meditations were interrupted by the sound of a bell ringing somewhere in the depths of the house. The sound was very faint, But the saint's hearing was abnormally keen, and he caught what most other men would have missed, the eccentric rhythm of the ringing. He had noted this down and pigeonholed it in his mind when a knock came on the door and a man entered. He muttered something to Biddle, and the millionaire left the room. Bloom strolled over to the saint, who welcomed him with a smile. "Our one and only tiger at last?" Bloom nodded and looked curiously at the saint.
"You have given us more trouble than you know," he said. "You have been extraordinarily lucky, but even the most astounding luck comes to an end."
"Just what they told me at Monty," agreed the saint. "They say the bank always wins in the long run." Watching closely, Simon could just note the least flicker of Bloom's eyelids.
"Fernando, of course,"
said Bloom, half to himself. "Even so," murmured the saint. "I know everything but the answer to the two most important questions of all. Who is the tiger, and where has he cached the loot? And I've a feeling that it won't be so long now before I get next to even those secrets."
"You're very confident,"
said Bloom. The man's self-control was not far from perfection, but the saint also played poker, and he had summed up Bloom to the last full stop in the course of that brief conversation. Bloom's nerves were none too good. No man who was reasonably sure of himself would have been made to feel vaguely uneasy by such a slender bluff. That put the saint one up on Bloom, but the saint did not disclose his knowledge of the state of the score. His smile did not vary its quiet assurance one iota. "It's an odds-on chance," said the saint lightly. "Which reminds me, how are T.T. Deeps?" Bloom did not answer, and the saint prattled on. "Now, I must say, you had me thinking very hard over that dud gold mine. Why should any sane man— you observe, Meinherr, that I credit you with being sane— why should any sane man want to get control of a gold mine that hasn't turned up any gold for 2 years? That's what I said to my broker, and he sent out a cable to the Transvaal especially to find out. Back comes the reply, we don't know. The mine hasn't been worked for ages, and only the greenhorn prospectors bother to look over the district. The old hands know that there isn't enough pay dirt for 100 square miles around the TT boring to stop a snail's tooth. And yet, our one and only Hans is raking in all the shares he can find, reminding change of a stock they'd all forgotten existed, and every poor little rabbit of a mug investor is hunting up his scrip and wondering whether to unload while the unloading's good or chance his arm for a fortune. All of which, to a nasty, suspicious mind like mine, is distinctly odd.
"I'm glad to see that the worry hasn't prematurely aged you, Mr. Templar," said Bloom.
"Oh, not at all," said the saint. "You see, just when I was on the point of going off my rocker with the strain, and my relatives were booking a room for me in a nice quiet asylum, along comes a flash of inspiration. Just suppose, Bloom, only suppose, that a bunch of bad hats had brought off one of the biggest bank breaks in history. Suppose they got away with something over a cool $1 million in gold. Suppose they'd humped the stuff all the way over the Atlantic, and fetched up and settled down, and stowed the body away in an English village, so far off the beaten track that it'd be lost for good if it wasn't for the railway timetables. And then suppose, mind you, this is only a theory, suppose they felt quite happy that the dicks weren't on the trail, and began to puzzle out how they were going to cash the proceeds of the dirty work. First of all, melt it down. There are so many warriors hawking golden American eagles around that the money changers don't look twice at you when you try to pass off a sack of them. Right. But now you aren't so much better off, because a golden $1 million tots up to a hairy great ingot, and people would start asking where the stuff came from. Whether you grow it in the kitchen garden or make it in the bathroom before breakfast. What then?
"What indeed?"
prompted Bloom in a tired voice. "Why?" exclaimed the saint delightedly, as though he had caught Bloom with a conundrum. "What's wrong with getting hold of a dead-as-mutton gold mine, losing a lot of gold in it, and then finding it again?"
"Quite,"
said Bloom with purely perfunctory interest. Simon shook his head. "It won't wash, Angel Face," he said. "It won't wash. Really it won't, and you know it. They may have christened me Simon, but I've got a lot less simple since then." Bloom turned away very wearily, as if he found the saint's monologue so boring that he had great difficulty in keeping awake, but that did not stop him hearing the saint's soft chuckle of sheer merriment. Bloom was good, but he was not quite good enough. There had been few doubts in the saint's mind about the accuracy of his diagnosis, and those that had existed were now gloriously dispelled. Nearly all the threads were in his hands, and the tangle was gradually straightening out. But who was the tiger? That was the most important question of all, barring only the whereabouts of the spoil. Who in all Bakem kept under his modest hat the brain that had conceived and organized that stupendous coup? Bloom, Biddle, and Carn could be ruled out. That left the highly respected Sir Michael Lapping, the pleasant but brainless Mr. Lomas Coper, the masculine Miss Girton, and the two retired and retiring ICS men, Messrs. Shaw and Smith. 5 runners, and a darn sight too little help from the form book. The saint frowned. Tackling the problem in the light of the law of probability, every one of the possibles had to be ruled out, which was manifestly absurd. Wiring into it with any mystery story as a textbook, it at once appeared that Lapping was too far above suspicion to escape it. Algy was too frankly brainless to be anything but the possessor of the great brain. Agatha Girton was quite certain to turn out to be a man masquerading as a woman, and Shaw and Smith kept too much in the background to avoid the limelight, which, once again, was manifestly absurd, and the order of seniority was of little assistance. For Bloom, Algy, Agatha Girton, and Biddle all had been living in Bakem for some time before the tiger smashed the strong room of the Confederate Bank of Chicago. On a general estimate, Simon reckoned that the tiger had spent at least 5 years over that crime, and that was a deduction that confirmed the saint's respect for the tiger's brilliance without going any distance to aid the solution of the mystery of the tiger's identity. The saint had got no further when Biddle returned and drew Bloom to one side. Simon could only hear a word here and there. He gathered that the tiger was furious with Biddle for taking so long and making so much noise over capturing the prisoner, that Biddle would have liked to see the tiger do better himself, that the tiger had an idea. There followed some mutterings that the saint did not catch, and then came one sentence quite distinctly.
"The tiger says we must let him go."
Bloom gave an exclamation, and Biddle talked further. The saint's brain was whirring like a buzzsaw. Let him go, with so much given away, and most of the court cards in their hands. Simon wondered if he had heard aright, but in a moment Biddle left Bloom and came over to confirm the sensitiveness of the saint's auditory nerves.
"It is getting late, Mr. Templar," said the millionaire, "and we all feel that the festivities have been kept up long enough. Pray, do not let us detain you any longer."
"Meaning?" suggested Simon, with as much levelness as he could command.
"Meaning that you are free to go as soon as you like."
Biddle looked hard at the saint as he spoke, and the malevolence that glittered in his eyes belied the geniality of his speech. Biddle was clearly upset at having to carry out such a command. He barked in order, and the escort of roughnecks sidled out of the room, closing the door behind them. Bloom was fidgeting with his tie, and he kept one hand in a pocket that bulged heavily. "That's nice of you," drawled the saint. "You won't mind if I take Anna, will you?" He strolled coolly over to the secretaire, jerked open the drawer, and retrieved the knife that they had taken from him, slipping it back into the sheath under his sleeve. Then he faced the 2 men again. "Really," he remarked in a tone of polite inquiry, "your kindness overwhelms me, and I never put you down for a brace of birds too gravely burdened with faith, hope, and charity. Is Miss Holmes such an insuperable obstacle to supermen like yourselves?"
"I think," said Biddle smoothly, "that you would be wise not to ask too many questions. It is quite enough for you to know, Mr. Templar, that your phenomenal luck has held, perhaps for the last time. You had better say good night before we change our minds."
The saint smiled. "You have no minds," he said. "The tiger says hop, and you blinkin' well hop. I wonder now, is it because you're scared of Oris? Oris is a devil when he's roused. And if you'd bumped me off and he got to know about it, there'd been hell to pay. Possibly you're wise."
"Possibly,"
snarled Bloom, as though he did not believe it, and the saint nodded. "There is always the chance that I might go and talk to the police, isn't there?" Biddle was lighting a cigar, and he looked up with a twisted mouth.
"You are not a man who loses his nerve and goes yelping to Scotland Yard, Mr. Templar," he answered. "Also, there is quite a big prize at stake. I think we can rely on you."
The saint stared back with a kind of reluctant admiration. "Almost I see you in the makings of sportsmen," he said.
"I can only hope,"
returned Biddle impassively,
"that you will find the sport to your liking."
Simon shook his head. "You won't disappoint me, beautiful one," he murmured. "I feel it in my bones. And so to bed. Give the tiger my love, and tell him I'm sorry I wasn't able to meet him." And the saint paused, struck by a sudden thought. "By the way, about Fernando, you know somebody's going to swing for him, don't you? I mean, if things start to go badly, make sure the tiger gets all the blame to himself, or else you might swing with him."
"We shall be careful,"
Biddle assured him. "Splendid," said the saint. "Well, cheerio, souls. Sleep tight, and pleasant dreams." He sauntered to the French doors and opened them. "If you don't mind, I have a rooted dislike for dark corridors. One never knows, does one?"
"Mr. Templar,"
the millionaire stopped him.
"before you go—"
The saint turned on the terrace and looked back into the room. He was still debonair and smiling, and although the shrubbery had given the coup de grace to his ancient and disreputably comfortable clothes, he contrived by some subtle gift of personality to look immaculate enough to wander into Claridge's without the commissaire spotting him and shooing him round to the tradesmen's entrance. Only the saint knew what an effort that air of careless ease cost him. The atmosphere was positively dripping with the smell of rats, but Simon Templar never twitched a nostril. "Comrade?"
"It might save you spending a sleepless night and catching your death of cold," observed Biddle, "if I told you that the tiger has already left, so you needn't bother to hang about outside."
"Thanks," said the saint. "I won't, and it might save you a longish walk and a lot of trouble if I told you that Oris and I sleep in watches, turn and turn about, so that any of your pals who call round in the hope of being able to catch us napping will have to be very fly. So long." He vanished into the darkness like a wraith, almost before the men in the library could have realized that he was gone. He went scraping through the shrubbery against the wall, got his coat over the top as before, and was over like a cat. He dropped lightly to the ground, pulled on the tattered coat, and struck off away from the wall after no more than a couple of seconds' pause to listen and scan the blackness in every direction. Guided by an innate bump of locality, he established his bearings at once and set off on a wide detour that would bring him eventually into the grounds at the back of the manor. He advanced in short rushes, stopping and crouching in cover every 20 yards or so, straining eyes and ears for sign of stalkers behind or an ambush before. Nothing happened. The night was quiet and peaceful. He saw a light go on in an upper window of Biddle's house, and the distant hiss of the surf mingled with the rustle of grasses brushed by the breeze, but there was neither sight nor sound of any human being. "Damned odd," said Templar to himself, scratching his head as he lay under a hedge, watching and listening like a frontiersman after at least a dozen of these rushes. "Flaming odd, or did I slip them by going over the wall?" He had fully expected to find some spicy parting gift waiting for him as soon as he got far enough away from Biddle's vicinity, when they would be hoping to take him off his guard. But nothing had interfered with his departure, and there had been no trace of even the feeblest attempt to create trouble for him when he arrived in the narrow lane that ran between the manor and Khan's house. "Blast!" said the saint almost indignantly. "Now why in blazes did they want to let me go?" He had seen no lights in any of the manor windows, and with a sudden apprehension he looked at the luminous dial of his watch. He was already a couple of minutes overdue. He swung round and sprinted up the path to Khan's cottage. The saint literally fell on the bell. Man, I do appreciate a book where they actually kind of slowly work you into the what's actually happening. So that's pretty cool. I am liking this book so far. I hope you are as well. If you are, I'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch. It's always good to hear from listeners and know that people are listening and enjoying the book. So yeah, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to leave a review on the podcast, that's always a great thing too, because it allows you to get in touch with me, but then it also allows other people to know about the podcast that it's worth listening to. So I really appreciate it. And I want to run through a few words that might have just kind of ran over your head here. The first one is spondulix, which literally just means money. Apparently, it's just a slang term that possibly refers to the Greek word spondylus, refers to a type of shell that uses as currency. So, who knows? Spondulic. It's like, hey, hand over the spondulix. Or, can I give you some spondulix? It just sounds so weird. Another word that I ran into this week that I was very confused about was Transvaal. There we go. And it's just an area, basically like a state within South Africa. So Transvaal is just like a section of South Africa. So that's where they were. And then he mentioned Claridge's, which I was just kind of ran by, and I was like, oh, I kind of want to look that up. It's actually still in operation. It's a luxury hotel in the heart of Mayfair, London. And maybe I'll put the link in the show notes because wow, it is crazy. So when he said that basically he looked debonair enough despite his disheveled appearance that he wouldn't get kicked out of Claridge's, this is what they're talking about. So I'll put the link in the show notes there. And if you've ever been to Claridge's, I'd love to hear from you and get a travel review on what it's like there at Claridge's, because it sounds like a nice spot. Sounds like the kind of place that I wouldn't mind going someday when I have more money. Speaking of money, if you guys want to become a patron and help me go to Claridge's, that'd be awesome. Or just help me keep the podcast going. That's really what it's all about. So thanks guys for listening, and we will catch you next week.